One of the hallmarks of banana republics or little dictatorships is the need for an external enemy on whom to blame everything. If the great Cuban nation didn't meet its quota for sugar, well, it was because of capitalist counter-revolutionary saboteurs. Never the fault of Castro or the communist system. If the Soviet Union didn't meet its tractor quota, it was the work of foreign underminers, never the government. In the modern Arab world, it's always the Jews or the Crusaders to blame. The classic illustration of the external enemy was in George Orwell's book 1984, which was set in the superstate of Oceania. Now, Oceania is always at war with East Asia, its perpetual cosmic enemy, until it's not. And then Oceania is always and was always an ally of East Asia and always has been at war with its perpetual enemy, Eurasia. I mean, it doesn't really matter as long as there is always an external threat to blame. And internal underminers to blame, too. In the book 1984, the character of Emmanuel Goldstein. No, I am not comparing the governments of the provinces of Ontario and Quebec to dictatorships, but they are governments that are failing. They run have-not provinces with high taxes, high debts, high unemployment, and it doesn't seem to be getting better. They keep promising more jobs, but they deliver fewer. They keep promising happy days ahead, but failing. So the political need for a scapegoat arises, if not as diabolically in the examples I gave earlier. A scapegoat to do two things: to switch the subject from the real problems that people truly care about to placebo issues, to distractions. And a scapegoat to blame anyone other than those two Liberal governments themselves, especially in the case of Ontario, where the Liberal Party has been in power for 11 years. So who would work? I mean, blaming a foreign country doesn't really work for provinces. Blaming an ethnic group is uncouth. Blaming an individual person, a devil like Emmanuel Goldstein, is a bit weird, though Kathleen Wynne has blamed Stephen Harper for a lot of Ontario's woes. So who? Well, Western Canada will do in a pinch, Alberta especially, oil pipelines, yeah, all that works. Those rich Westerners, rich just by dumb luck, they got the oil, it's not fair. Forget about the fact that Quebec has billions of barrels of oil and cubic feet of natural gas that it simply chooses not to develop. It's unfair that Alberta develops its oil and gas. Forget about Ontario blowing the Ring of Fire mining opportunity. Billions of dollars of potential investments, thousands of jobs, especially for Aboriginal communities. Ontario just blew it. Those mining companies are now pulling out. But Alberta's success, it's just dumb luck. They got rich off it. Sure, they paid transfer payments to Ontario and Quebec, but still not fair. They got all the dough. So why not scapegoat Alberta? And to a lesser extent, Saskatchewan's oil and gas industry, too. It's not like Westerners have a vote in Ontario and Quebec. Westerners, Albertans, that's the closest thing to an ethnic group to hate. It's very fashionable to do so. You'll certainly get no pushback from the mainstream media. If another province demonized Quebec, there would be a national freakout. But it's fun to demonize Albertans and stereotype them as rude, dumb hicks with more money than brains. So it was decided to distract from their own failures in their own provinces, to scapegoat, to switch the fake problem of greenhouse gases for the real problem of no jobs and high debt. The two Liberal premiers of Ontario and Quebec have decided to hold hostage the proposed oil pipeline from Alberta through Saskatchewan, proposed to go through to New Brunswick. By the way, much of that pipeline is already built, but what is yet to be built is more than $10 billion worth of construction work, most of it to benefit Eastern Canada, by the way. But Kathleen Wynne of Ontario and Philippe Couillard of Quebec see a way to demonize the other, to blame an outside force for problems, even if they're imaginary problems, and to demand a payoff in the form of carbon taxes for any oil going through that pipeline.
We've taken some steps in terms of, major steps in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We know that there's more to be done. We've agreed that we need to work with Quebec.
The cost of putting a price on carbon has come up. Nobody talks about the cost of not fighting climate change. This cost is passed to citizens too, whether it's healthcare, coastal erosion, spectacular weather events, as we now have to be used to. This is hugely expensive for our society. The cost of doing nothing is much more.
Imagine if a Western premier had the same demands for anything shipped from Ontario and Quebec to the west to the Port of Vancouver for export to Asia. Imagine if BC or Alberta or Saskatchewan demanded a cut of anything exported west from central Canada and cooked up fake excuses like their sudden concern for the environment. It would be outrageous, and the media would never accept it. Here, the media are cheerleaders for it. Well, I'm delighted that at least one premier is willing to stand up firmly to the scapegoaters. Here, let me play for you some comments by Saskatchewan's Premier Brad Wall exposing the con that the Liberals are trying to pass off.
I did speak with Premier Wynne. We had an honest and frank discussion. She stated her position. She doesn't view what they're doing as barriers to the Energy East pipeline. I don't agree. Again, I've never heard interests in Central Canada ask about the GHG footprint of oil from Venezuela or Algeria or Iraq that Canada is currently importing, that our Canadian oil would replace. So it seems to me that they want to hold Western Canadian oil to a higher standard than foreign oil that we're importing. That doesn't make sense to me.
Exactly. These new demands that Ontario and Quebec will oppose the Energy East pipeline unless there are greenhouse gas studies done. Well, that's new, isn't it? I mean, Ontario and Quebec have been importing OPEC oil for decades. Never a study about greenhouse gases. They don't really care. It's a propaganda exercise to cover for their Alberta baiting and their tax grabbing. Here's more from Brad Wall.
I've agreed with Premiers Wynne and Couillard that their questions around safety and the environment should be answered. My point is they already are answered under the National Energy Board process. That's my view. And they've kind of said that. They support the process. And they said in principle they support the pipeline. So why then, throw up 6 different conditions? One of them is a GHG measure of the oil, which nobody can define. It sounds to me like delay or potentially something to develop into a barrier, and that's not on. We want Canadians to know. I don't think that the provinces or the industries in any of the pipeline debates, oil-producing provinces, have done a very good job with respect to getting out facts on maybe it's Gateway or maybe it's Keystone. We ought to do that this time.
Imagine if Alberta and Saskatchewan just made conditions for letting things go through on the Trans-Canada Highway or on the CP or CN Railway from Ontario and Quebec to the West Coast. Unconstitutional for them to do so, but they just thought, hey, why don't we take a cut of what Ontario and Quebec are selling? Oh, in the name of the environment and safety, of course. All to distract from other real problems. And here's the num of it. Look at this.
We ought to let Canadians know from coast to coast to coast that right now we still are relying on foreign oil from places like Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Algeria when we are a massive oil producer. Why would we do that? Why wouldn't we replace the need for foreign oil and become energy self-sufficient? Because, by the way, Canada, while we need to do better by the environment in terms of more sustainable development of energy, I'll put our record up against the record on GHGs or the environment against Venezuela or Saudi Arabia. I'll put our human rights record certainly up against any of those places any day of the week. It's like we're almost ashamed that this country has oil. We ought not to be. Rather a country that is a democracy and concerned about sustainability have it than some of the other places perhaps that could.
That's the ethical oil argument. Oil from OPEC, oil from Western Canada. I mean, it all burns the same in your tank when it's made into gasoline, same kind of molecules. But Canadian oil is ethical oil. Imported oil is often conflict oil. Why does Kathleen Wynne prefer OPEC oil from OPEC countries, conflict oil from OPEC countries, where they stone women to death for adultery and hang gay men by the thousand? Why does Philippe Couillard prefer Sharia oil from countries that support terrorism and that ban labor unions? Why do they prefer oil from countries with no environmental laws, no free press, no independent courts, no civil liberties? And why do they think we are so stupid that we won't notice that, like a petty propagandist in Orwell's 1984, that we won't notice that they claim they've always been for greenhouse gas studies of oil before, when in fact they never have, until it's time for their 2 minutes of hate against their eternal enemy, Alberta.